are talking about KOMA, a Russian science fiction fantasy movie that will evoke images of Inception and Doctor Strange. So what we have here, we have a world which is essentially another dimension, and when someone goes into a coma, their consciousness is transported to this dimension, and this dimension is filled with memories and parts of memories that will form the kind of the landscape and things like this, and people can interact with the fragments of what they've kind of remembered, but they don't really remember too much details about themselves, their names, where they've come from, just places and things like that they can interact with. Add to that, you have these strange beings called the Reapers, which seem to be intent on destroying any kind of like sentient humans that are kind of transported to this kind of world. And it's up to a group of ultimately coma people in comas, their consciousness, to kind of band together to try and find some type of sanctuary. Along the way, things are revealed. There's a bigger picture at play here. What will happen? You have to watch the movie to find out. So there's been some pretty interesting films coming out of Russia within recent years, and this is no exception. And certainly, you know, a comparable film to the likes of what Christopher Nolan would come up with. I think the easiest comparison here probably will be Conception, as it is a kind of a dreamscape style story here. And certainly some of the kind of the visual imagery as well here will evoke that. It being this kind of fantasy style landscape, there is a lot of computer generated imagery here, but I have to say it's done to a good standard, and there's some breathtaking sequences where people are running around these kind of like partial parts of cities and kind of different locales and things like that, and it all looks very, very unique and kind of visually very, very interesting. There's also a fair bit of action within this movie as well. These kind of group of survivors seem to develop a supernatural gift, a little bit like X-Men when they're in this kind of world. It may have something to do with what they were doing kind of on the outside world. I'm not going to give any kind of spoilers here in regards, but we have you know, different powers emanate from different people who, you know, that touches their kind of maybe their real life persona here. And I think the story has quite an interesting narrative as it goes on, and there's obviously a couple of twists here, I think, but they all make kind of sense, and they do ask some kind of like moral questions of the audience, which I think was pretty interesting here, and and a pretty well paced movie overall. So I actually kind of quite like this one. I think it's a pretty well put together movie, and the acting from some of the cast here is pretty good. However, let's talk about any negatives I have here. I think the negatives for me primarily come from some of the kind of the characters here. I feel that some of the characters are cliches. We get the kind of like the badass soldier who doesn't take shit from anyone, things like this. And although you could argue maybe these are only partially formed characters because they don't remember all their kind of past lives and stuff, nonetheless they do feel a little bit like you know, a little bit cliche at times. I have to say as well, I wasn't so keen on the kind of the aesthetic of the kind of the steampunk look. Everyone in this universe seems to have this steampunk look, and it's like, well, why? What's that aesthetic got to do with anything, to be honest with you? And why is it across everywhere? It also contradicts itself a couple of times within this movie. For example, we are told that people who don't have these gifts, these powers, don't go on missions, but in the next scene, those same people have said that are on missions. Things like this. So there are a couple of inconsistencies. Admittedly, maybe something could have been lost in translation here. And yeah, I mean, you know, the effects are to a great standard, but once in a while you'll kind of be reminded you're looking at kind of CGI images. I mean, I always find it a little difficult to sometimes judge foreign accents, you know, obviously because I'm not listening to it in a kind of the English language, so it's sometimes difficult to really judge some of the acting here. But there were like some of the performances, especially from our main character here. Some of the supporting roles I just felt were a little hammy, to be honest. So Overall, though, I think this is a really, really well put together movie, fun fantasy movie, science fiction movie with an interesting kind of like third act, and third act is always kind of the hardest one to pull off. But I actually think this third act actually pretty succeeds, if you ask my honest opinion. I enjoyed it. Well worth a watch, I think. 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.